What if the most dangerous people in your life aren't the loud ones? What if they aren't the obvious manipulators, the villains you've learned to avoid, but the ones who smile, the ones who seem kind familiar, maybe even family? You think you know who's around you. You believe you can sense when someone's energy is off, when a boundary has been crossed, when something just feels wrong. You're confident that you'd recognize toxicity the moment it enters a room. But what if you're wrong? What if the real threats don't come wearing masks of cruelty, but masks of charm? What if the most destructive people are not shouting from the rooftops, but whispering sweetly in your ear? What if, while you're busy defending yourself from obvious enemies, you're leaving the doors of your mind wide open for something far more insidious? Carl Gustav Jung devoted his life to uncovering these hidden dangers. In his groundbreaking work, The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung revealed a startling truth. Most of what governs human behavior lies beyond our conscious control. And this doesn't apply only to you. It applies to everyone, including the people closest to you. And that is precisely where the danger hides. Because when someone remains blind to their own inner darkness, when they've never faced their emotional wounds, their repressed shame, or their buried rage, that shadow doesn't disappear. It looks for a place to land. It searches for a host. And too often that host is you. Maybe you've never thought about it this way, but think about it now. Really ask yourself, how many times have you left a conversation feeling emotionally drained, even though you didn't talk about anything serious? How many times have you been blamed for someone else's emotional storm, made to feel responsible for their pain, their moods, their breakdowns? How many times have you become the villain in a story that isn't yours, or the savior in a tragedy that doesn't belong to you? This isn't coincidence. This isn't sensitivity. This is projection. Jung called it an unconscious mechanism in which people offload what they refuse to face in themselves by casting it onto others. And the moment that happens, you stop being a person. You become a symbol, a mirror, an enemy, a savior. And here's the terrifying part. None of those roles are truly you. But the manipulation is so quiet, so subtle, so emotionally layered that you often don't even realize it's happening. You think you're helping. You believe you're being supportive. You're convinced you're being the mature one. Meanwhile, you are being pulled into someone else's psychological storm. You are trying to solve problems that were never yours to carry. You are being influenced, controlled by emotional forces that don't even belong to you. And the worst part, these people often aren't bad. They're not scheming villains. They're not plotting to hurt you. They're unconscious. And as Jung warned us, the most dangerous individuals are not the evil ones. They are the unaware ones, the ones ruled by their unresolved traumas, the ones dominated by masks, complexes, and hidden emotional wounds. They live in denial, alienated from their own psyches. And that disconnect makes them unstable. Not evil, but dangerous. And danger like this doesn't enter with flashing lights or screaming alarms. It slips in quietly through daily interactions, through small comments, half jokes, silent glares, and emotional withdrawals, until one day you're second-guessing your own reality. And that's when you've lost touch with your inner truth. That's when you're no longer centered in yourself, but orbiting someone else's emotional chaos. Maybe this is happening to you right now, in a relationship, in a friendship, in a work environment, even within your own family. And maybe, just maybe, you're blaming yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. Asking, why can't I fix this? Why am I always the one who feels responsible? The truth is, there's nothing wrong with you, but there is something very wrong with how you've been made into a container for someone else's pain. You are being used not maliciously, but unconsciously as a vessel for someone else's psychological baggage. And it's time to name it, to see it, and to finally take your power back. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain and expose the 6 types of people that Carl Jung would have identified as emotionally dangerous. These aren't cartoon villains. These are real profiles, real people acting not out of calculated malice, but from deep unconscious drives they themselves don't understand. And that's what makes them so destructive. We'll use Jung's own words, his theories, insights, and warnings taken directly from works like The Ego and the Unconscious Ion, and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. This isn't surface-level psychology. This is raw, deep, and confronting. Because by the end of this video, you won't just be able to recognize these profiles in others, you might start seeing traces of them in yourself. And that's where the real work begins. Are you ready? Then take a deep breath and let's move forward. But a word of caution, once you learn what's about to be revealed, you won't be able to look at people or even at yourself the same way again. Imagine living with someone who blames you for everything they feel. Your presence becomes their trigger. Their pain becomes your fault. Their chaos becomes your responsibility. At first, they seem fragile, sensitive, deep. You think they need love, compassion, patience. But over time, you realize you've been dragged into a psychological battlefield that isn't yours, and you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator, a person completely dominated by unhealed wounds and repressed emotions who unconsciously turns you into their emotional battleground. Jung once said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." And sometimes, that fate shares your dinner table. So we've seen how the unconscious manipulator uses emotional projection to make you the villain or the savior in their internal drama. But here's the catch: they don't break in. They're invited through your own empathy. That's what makes them so effective. They don't scream, they don't threaten, they don't demand. They softly slip in through the side door of your compassion. They appear fragile, broken, misunderstood. And before you realize it, you're offering more of yourself than you ever intended, trying to be their healer, their lifeline, their mirror. But if you want to protect yourself from this kind of manipulation, you need more than kindness. You need awareness. Awareness is the antidote. You have to learn to recognize the patterns, the subtle recurring cues that something isn't right. You must learn to question not just what they say, but how you feel in their presence. Is the emotion you're carrying even yours, or has it been transferred onto you? This is where the invisible strings begin to unravel. Because once you see the manipulation for what it is, you can cut the emotional cords that bind you to their unconscious narrative. You begin to reclaim your center, your truth. But just as you start to build that inner clarity, another mask often appears deeper, more polished, more insidious. The unconscious manipulator projects. But the next type doesn't just project, they perform. They live, breathe, and operate through a carefully constructed social mask, the persona. And this is where things get even more dangerous. Because while the unconscious manipulator is emotionally chaotic and vulnerable, the bearer of the persona is the exact opposite. They're composed, confident, impeccable, the kind of person who seems to have it all together. But according to Jung, that illusion is exactly what makes them a psychological risk. Not every threat comes from emotional volatility. Some come from perfection, from the ever-present smile, from the polished exterior, from the flawless reputation. We live in a world obsessed with appearance where seeming has become more important than being. And Jung saw this as a serious spiritual danger. Because when someone identifies too closely with their persona, the mask they wear to function in society, they lose touch with their inner self. They become what others expect, not what they truly are. In his book, The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains it clearly. The persona is what someone is not, but what he and others think he is. It is in essence a false identity, shaped by expectations, molded by roles: doctor, teacher, parent, friend, leader. And to be clear, the persona isn't inherently wrong. We all wear masks to some extent. We all play roles. They help us adapt, function, survive. The danger begins when someone believes they are only the mask, when the performance becomes reality, when the real self, the vulnerable, spontaneous emotional self, is buried deep beneath the surface. The bearer of the persona is the master of social performance. They say what others want to hear. They act the way others expect them to act. They rarely show emotion unless it's carefully curated for the setting. They avoid conflict at all costs. They maintain control. They present an image of perfection. But behind that mask, the soul is starving, because the more effort they put into appearing fine, the more their true self is suffocated. And eventually that internal repression builds pressure. And that pressure always demands release. Living with someone like this can feel strange. There's no chaos, no yelling, no blame, but there's also no intimacy, no depth, no realness. Something feels off. You can't quite put your finger on it, but something's missing. It's authenticity. Every conversation feels rehearsed. every reaction carefully measured. You feel like you are in a play, not a relationship. And it gets worse because they want you to perform too. They project their need for perfection onto you. They expect you to say the right things, act the right way, play your role in their carefully controlled script. Try showing real emotion, an outburst of anger, a cry for help, a moment of doubt, and you'll watch them flinch. Withdraw, shut down, because your honesty reminds them of everything they've buried, and they can't handle it. Jung was clear. This identification with the persona is one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the journey of becoming a whole integrated person. Because when someone believes they are the role they play, they stop growing. They become hypnotized by the image in the mirror. The danger. They start living only for approval, recognition, applause. They become slaves to their own facade. And everything real, every spark of vulnerability, passion, fear, creativity gets buried beneath the surface. Living with this kind of person doesn't just feel artificial. It starts to affect you too. You begin second-guessing your words, hiding your emotions, dimming your truth. And before long, you start wearing a mask, not out of deceit, but out of survival. The bearer of the persona is contagious. They don't just hide from themselves. They slowly teach you to do the same. But here's the darkest part of all. What gets repressed doesn't disappear. It sinks. It simmers in the unconscious, quietly fermenting until it becomes shadow. And that's where the next danger emerges. When someone spends their life trying to be light, to be nice, to be perfect, they end up pushing all their darkness into the basement of their soul. But basements don't stay sealed forever. Sooner or later, the shadow breaks free. And that leads us to the third type, the one who doesn't project like the manipulator or pretend like the persona bearer. They repress. They bury their truth so deeply that it begins to rot, and when it returns, it comes back with violence. In the next part, we will dive into the owner of the repressed shadow, the one who tries so hard to be good, so hard to be in control, so hard to be liked that they lose touch with their own dark side until it erupts. Jung devoted much of his work to this phenomenon. In Aeon, he wrote, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in themselves and yet insists on manifesting in some way." And here's the shocking part. The shadow is not the evil in the world. It's not the enemy. It's not them. It's you. It's your anger, your envy, your suppressed desires, your ambition disguised as humility, your resentment cloaked in politeness. Everything you hide doesn't vanish. It becomes shadow. And Jung warned, what you do not make conscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. We just uncovered how the bearer of the persona suffocates their truth behind the performance of perfection. But when you lock away who you truly are long enough that repressed energy doesn't disappear, it becomes something darker, something volatile. At first glance, these people often appear admirable, disciplined, kind, respectable. They're helpful, polite, respected in their circles. They might even be leaders, teachers, mentors, figures others look up to. But if you spend time with them, you start to sense something strange, something lurking just beneath the surface. They have little tolerance for vulnerability. They flinch at emotional intensity. They get uncomfortable around authenticity. They don't tolerate weakness, especially not in others. They shut down around raw emotion. They react coldly to spontaneity. And though they appear calm, something always feels charged, like an emotional mine waiting to explode. And when it does, it's devastating. These individuals live in a constant state of emotional vigilance. They police their own feelings ruthlessly, and in doing so, they condemn others for expressing theirs. They don't allow themselves to err, so they silently attack those who do. They become rigid, moralistic, controlling. But all of this is just a thin wall, a defense mechanism, an effort to keep their own unconscious, their shadow, from breaking through. Carl Jung warned us clearly, the stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow. And the more that shadow is denied, the more brutal its return will be. You've likely met someone like this. They're the ones who erupt over something small. They hold grudges for years. They sabotage relationships in subtle, passive-aggressive ways. They never explode until they do, and when they do, it's wildly out of proportion. They are the ones others whisper about, saying, "I don't know why they're so bitter." so resentful, so hard to be around? The answer: they are not just carrying wounds. They are carrying a repressed shadow, one that has never been faced, integrated, or acknowledged. And here's something that's often overlooked. The shadow is not only made of darkness. Jung taught that the shadow contains your denied potential too. Your unexpressed creativity, your hidden strength, your deep desires, your vitality. But when that shadow is left ignored for too long, all of that power turns into poison. Poison that leaks into your relationships, your environment, and especially onto those closest to you. Living with someone like this is like living next to a volcano, quiet on the outside, but constantly simmering inside. You don't know what will trigger them. You walk on eggshells. You shrink yourself to avoid waking the monster. Until eventually, it erupts, and you're left with the emotional aftermath. But this kind of repression doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's usually built on an illusion, a belief in moral superiority, a rigid ideal of righteousness which uses guilt as a weapon and shame as a leash. And that leads us directly into the next figure, the moral controller. This is someone who not only represses their own shadow, but tries to make you feel guilty for embracing yours. This is the person who doesn't carry a sword but a cross, who doesn't shout but uses phrases like, "it's for your own good," or "someone needs to say it." Their weapons are not fists or fury, but rules, dogmas, and carefully constructed masks of virtue. Jung saw this archetype as one of the greatest dangers to psychic freedom, because when morality becomes a facade, it doesn't liberate, it imprisons. The moral controller hides their own shadow behind a curtain of ethics, rules, and righteousness. And instead of confronting their impulses, they project them onto others. They turn you into the sinner, the immoral one, the lost cause. All so they can preserve their illusion of purity. And make no mistake, this kind of projection isn't always obvious. It comes cloaked in good intentions, in truth, in help. They'll say things like, "you'll thank me later. I'm only saying this because I care. Someone has to hold the line." But their truth is not neutral. It's laced with control. It's rooted in their inability to confront their own desires, contradictions, and suppressed emotions. And Jung speaks of the archetype of Christ and the Antichrist symbols, not of good and evil, but of wholeness and dissociation. The moral controller believes they are embodying light, but they refuse to acknowledge their darkness. And so they project all that is impure onto others while clinging to their own mask of holiness. They become blind to nuance, blind to complexity, blind to the beautiful chaos of the human soul. If you live with or near someone like this, you may begin to feel constantly judged. Like no matter what you do, you're always wrong. You may feel like you're being watched, sized up, criticized, even when you're just living. The worst part: over time, you begin to internalize it. You silence your laughter, you filter your opinions, you hide your spontaneity. You begin to repress yourself, not because you want to, but because their moral standard becomes your emotional prison. This dynamic is tragically common in families, religious institutions, and environments where obedience is confused with virtue. And Jung was clear: where there is excessive moralism, there is a lack of self-knowledge, because the extreme moralist doesn't want truth. They want control. And when they can't control their own chaos, they start controlling yours. But the moral controller isn't the final stop on this map of unconscious danger. There's another figure who's even more volatile, even more unstable, the one who is not repressing their inner chaos, but is completely ruled by it. They don't perform like the persona. They don't project like the controller. They don't even recognize what's happening inside them. They are possessed by it. Jung called them the complexed. And in the next part, we'll enter this explosive territory, where trauma, repressed emotion, and unconscious archetypes take the wheel, and the individual becomes a puppet of their own inner storm. We've just explored the stormy world of those who are dominated by unconscious complexes, people who love you one day and tear you down the next, not out of cruelty, but because they have never healed. But now, get ready to meet the most confusing type of all, the one who drains you without raising their voice. Picture this: one moment you are being embraced with affection, sweetness, even generosity. The next, you're being accused of something you never did. A kind word turns sharp. A joke suddenly feels threatening. A simple gesture is twisted into something dark. And you find yourself standing in emotional wreckage without knowing how you got there. This is the chaotic reality of living with someone ruled by unconscious complexes. Carl Jung defined complexes as autonomous clusters of emotion and memory. They live in the unconscious, but they don't stay there quietly. They act, they speak, they hijack. They are like fragmented personalities built from trauma psychic wounds and unhealed experiences. And when triggered, they seize control of a person's behavior without warning. In works like Psychological Types, In the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung described how these complexes can cause someone to react not to the present moment, but to echoes of the past. A simple question might awaken an old wound of rejection. An innocent gesture might trigger memories of betrayal. A comment you make meant with kindness is filtered through a trauma that has nothing to do with you. And when that switch is flipped, you pay the price. The problem, they don't even know they're doing it. They believe they're being reasonable. They're convinced their anger is justified. But what's really happening is this: they are reliving emotions they've never digested. These emotional takeovers don't happen constantly, but in episodes. That's what makes it even more dangerous. There are moments of sweetness, of connection, of love. They'll smile, they'll apologize, they'll make you feel seen. And for a moment, everything feels okay again. And that's what traps you, because sometimes they really are wonderful. But then the storm returns, and it always does. And each time it does, it leaves you more confused, more depleted, more entangled in a drama that never belonged to you in the first place. In an attempt to preserve peace, you begin to shrink. You tiptoe around topics. You overthink every word. You walk on eggshells, careful not to disturb the monster that's sleeping just beneath the surface. But here's the harsh truth. You didn't wake the monster. It was always there, hungry, latent, waiting for a trigger. And when it emerges, it devours everything in its path: joy, intimacy, connection, and eventually, your identity. Jung warned, unrecognized complexes colonize the psyche. They speak in your place. They feel in your place. They live for you. And for the complex person, this colonization is frequent and intense. They may be ruled by a complex of inferiority, where everything you do feels like a threat, or martyrdom, where they constantly suffer and you are always to blame, or abandonment, persecution, or betrayal, each with its own narrative, its own emotional charge, its own irrational demands. And the more you try to keep the peace, the more you feed the illusion that you can control something that cannot be controlled. Being close to someone like this feels like being stuck in a loop of unpredictability. The present is never really the present, it's haunted by ghosts. And eventually you start to absorb those ghosts yourself. You doubt your memory, you question your emotions, you forget what's real and what's reaction. And slowly you too become colonized, not by your own unconscious, but by theirs. But just when you think you've seen it all, there's a final kind of danger. A quieter, subtler, but equally destructive figure. They don't explode. They don't shout. They don't accuse. They simply drain you. Welcome to the world of the psychic vampire, the most silent and insidious force of emotional exhaustion. This is the person who feeds off your time, your empathy, your availability, not out of malice, but out of dependency masked as connection. They don't want your presence. They want your energy, and they will do anything to get it, not through violence, not through confrontation, but through subtle demands, chronic victimhood, and emotional neediness disguised as affection. And Jung, though he never used the term psychic vampire, pointed to this dynamic clearly. In works like Ion and the Ego and the Unconscious, he warned against symbiotic relationships connections where boundaries disappear and two psyches melt into one unhealthy whole. This, he believed, was one of the greatest threats to individuation, the path to self-knowledge, wholeness, and psychic freedom. The psychic vampire thrives in this exact condition. They require your constant validation. They need your presence at all times. They live off your emotional availability. And here's the trap. Behind their neediness is a void you cannot fill no matter how much love, care, or patience you pour into it. You begin by offering help, then you offer time. Then you tolerate manipulation in the name of understanding. Until one day you wake up, and you don't know where you end and where they begin. The exhaustion isn't just physical, it's spiritual, existential. It's like your soul is being drained drop by drop, day after day. Jung described this kind of person as one who is unable to sustain themselves psychically, so they attach to others like parasites. And while it may sound cruel, it's the truth. These individuals aren't evil. They're wounded, but the impact is the same. They leave you feeling empty, confused, and lost in a relationship that consumes more than it gives. In the final part of this series, we'll bring all of this together because now you know the 6 types Jung would have seen as the most emotionally dangerous, not because they intend harm, but because they are ruled by unconscious forces. But now comes the most important question. How do you protect yourself? How do you break free? How do you stop being the container for someone else's chaos? We'll explore exactly what Jung believed to be the way out of the unconscious jungle and how you can begin to return to your true self. Make sure you stay with us until the end, because what comes next might just set you free. We've just explored the silent erosion caused by the psychic vampire, the one who drains, not by force but by dependency, masked as care. But the real danger isn't just in the fatigue they leave behind. It's in what they take from you without you even noticing. Because over time, something deeper than your energy begins to vanish, your sense of self. You start to feel guilty for needing time alone. You question whether your desire for silence makes you cold. You wonder if setting boundaries means you're selfish. And slowly, quietly, you begin to betray your own needs just to preserve peace. But this isn't peace. This is psychological captivity. The psychic vampire is a master of subtle reversal. They can shift roles so seamlessly it leaves your mind spinning. One moment they're fragile, helpless, dependent. The next they're accusatory, offended, disappointed, emotionally manipulative. They go from being the one who needs comfort to the one who makes you feel like you're the problem. Suddenly, you're the one who's distant. You're the one who's selfish. You're the one who's changed. And so you begin to shape your life around avoiding emotional collapse. You do what you can to prevent outbursts. You give more. You say less. You shrink. But the bond you're trying to protect is not nurturing you. It's killing you slowly from the inside out. Jung warned us that these relationships, where the unconscious rules the dynamic, can dissolve the boundaries of the self. You lose track of who you are. Your center weakens, and your emotional reality becomes dictated by someone else's unmet needs. But there's hope. There is a way out, and Jung gave us the key. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This path, this awakening, begins with awareness, not just of others, but of ourselves. Because the truth is none of us are innocent in this landscape. We've all at one point or another worn the mask of the persona, projected our wounds, reacted from unhealed places. Maybe without realizing it, we too have been the manipulator, or the controller, or yes, even the psychic vampire. None of us are immune, but we all have a shadow, we all carry pain. We all have parts we would rather not look at. But here's the difference. There are those who dare to look inward, and there are those who keep projecting outward. This video wasn't just an analysis, it was a mirror, a reflection of the unconscious games that shape our relationships, our identity, and our suffering. If you've made it this far, it means something in you is ready to see the name to break free. And that right there is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from others, but freedom from psychic captivity. Freedom from being a hostage to emotional manipulation. Freedom to reclaim your space, to own your voice, to return to the center of your own psyche. That's what Jung's path is really about. It's not about blame. It's not about calling others toxic and walking away. It's about owning your inner world, standing in your truth without apology. So now I want to invite you to take the next step. Scroll down to the comments and share with us. Which of these profiles have you encountered in your life? And more courageously, which one do you recognize within yourself? Your comment might be the spark that awakens someone else. It might become a doorway for someone still living in confusion. Because when we speak the truth without shame, we help others do the same. And before you go, don't miss what comes next. The next video in this series will take you even deeper. We'll continue to uncover the hidden layers of the psyche and, more importantly, begin mapping the road back to wholeness. Because the more light we shine on the unconscious, the less power it has to control us. So keep watching, keep questioning, keep reclaiming yourself. This journey isn't over. It's only just begun.